The young and the restless spoiler's shock. Kane had always believed that time could mend broken things, but as he stood before Lily and felt the heat of emotions long buried rise again, he realized that his desire to win her back was not just a fleeting impulse. It was the only thing anchoring him in a life that had begun to spiral out of control. There was an undeniable tenderness in the way he looked at her, the way he remembered the rhythm of their shared past and the fragile moments that had once held them together. And while she hesitated, cautious and bruised from all the years of conflict and missteps, she did not reject him outright. That single pause, that slight hesitation, was all it took to inflame the hope in his heart. Yet hope can be dangerous, especially when entangled with guilt and forgotten promises. While Kane plotted his emotional return to Lily's heart, he neglected the fragile truth of his current reality. Amanda was still in his life, still in his bed, and more importantly, still in love with him. Amanda had always prided herself on seeing through people's masks, but she had willingly allowed herself to be deceived by the man she thought she had finally tamed. She wasn't blind to the way Kane's gaze lingered too long on Lily, nor to the sudden urgency in his voice whenever Lily's name was mentioned. Still, she had convinced herself that his intentions were innocent, perhaps driven by residual friendship or guilt. But as days passed and Kane grew increasingly restless, Amanda could no longer ignore what was obvious. The man she loved was in love with someone else. And not just anyone else, his ex-wife. That realization carved out something bitter and primal within her. Betrayal, when it comes from someone you trust, doesn't just break the heart. It corrupts it. Amanda, once rational and poised, found herself overwhelmed by a cocktail of rage and humiliation. She drank more than she should have. And in that moment of vulnerability, she turned to the one person who had once understood her better than anyone, Devon. Devon didn't expect Amanda's late-night visit. It had been months since they had spoken at length, but something in her voice over the phone told him this wasn't casual. When she arrived, her hands trembling and her eyes glassy with suppressed emotion, he knew better than to ask questions. She broke down in front of him, unraveling every lie, every suspicion, every betrayal she felt from Kane. As Amanda poured her heart out, Devon listened. She had once meant so much to him, and even now, after all the chaos and silence, there was a deep well of compassion for her. He told himself that offering comfort wasn't crossing a line. But the way her fingers brushed against his, the way her eyes pleaded for understanding, there was a pull that was harder to resist than either of them expected. Devon wanted to be the anchor she had lost. Yet, even as he held her, he knew the line between compassion and betrayal was perilously thin. What began as solace teetered dangerously close to something much more intimate. But whether they gave in to that temptation or not, the damage had already been done in Amanda's mind. She didn't come to Devon for clarity. She came for retribution. Amanda had never considered herself vengeful, but Kane had unlocked a part of her she didn't recognize. The Amanda who thrived in courtrooms, who disarmed adversaries with logic and grace, had been replaced by a woman who wanted to destroy. Not just walk away, but burn the bridge entirely. She began seeking out names, people from Kane's past with grudges, competitors who had suffered under his ambition, rivals who had waited years for a chance to bring him down. It didn't take long to find someone willing to join her crusade. There was always someone willing to help tear down a man once considered untouchable. Amanda didn't care about the risks. She wanted Kane humiliated. She wanted him exposed. And if she couldn't have his loyalty, she'd ensure no one else would either. Meanwhile, Kane remained blind to the storm gathering behind him. Obsessed with reconnecting with Lily, he began subtly sabotaging Amanda's presence in his life. He canceled dinners, forgot important dates, avoided meaningful conversations. His entire emotional focus had shifted, and he hadn't realized Amanda was slipping away, not in silence, but in fury. He told himself that Lily needed time, that their family could be whole again if only he could show her he had changed. But the past has a way of infecting the present, and Lily was not as easily swayed as he had hoped. She saw the chaos Amanda's absence had stirred in him, saw the unraveling guilt and the delusions he tried to mask. She respected Kane, perhaps still loved him in a distant way, but the future he envisioned for them belonged to a different time. Lily had evolved. And in that evolution, she had found strength that Kane hadn't yet learned to admire. She wasn't going to be anyone's second act. When whispers began reaching Kane about Amanda meeting with a certain rival, an old adversary from a corporate battle he thought long buried, he brushed it off as coincidence. But then came the leaks. Emails from his past surfaced mysteriously. Deals he had buried were unearthed. Anonymous tips were sent to reporters. Rumors spread in boardrooms. At first, he believed it was corporate espionage, some competitor trying to gain leverage. But the patterns were too precise. The knowledge too intimate. The betrayal too personal. Only someone close, someone trusted, could orchestrate such a campaign. And only one person came to mind. The confrontation, when it happened, was quiet at first. Amanda no longer needed to scream. Her silence was lethal. Her gaze, cold and unwavering. She didn't deny her involvement. She didn't confess either. But Kane saw it in her eyes, the satisfaction, the justified fury. He realized then what his neglect had cost. Not just a relationship, but the trust of someone who had once seen him as her future. He wanted to be angry, but guilt eclipsed his pride. He had lit the match. Amanda had merely watched him burn. And Devon? His role remained ambiguous. He refused to discuss with anyone what had or hadn't happened between him and Amanda. He didn't see it as betrayal, because in his eyes, Kane had surrendered Amanda long before she showed up at his door. But silence has consequences too, and soon Devon found himself caught between loyalty and regret. In the aftermath, Kane stood alone, watching the pieces of his life scatter like ashes in the wind. His pursuit of Lily had cost him Amanda. His disregard for Amanda had birthed a vendetta. And now, with his reputation in shambles and his personal life in ruins, he was left to wonder whether love had ever been his to claim, or just a fantasy he kept chasing in circles. But if Kane had learned anything from this, it was that betrayal never starts with a knife in the back. It starts with a whisper in the dark, a hand withdrawn, a heart that looks the other way. And now, as the shadows closed in, he finally realized that the people he had wounded were no longer waiting to be saved. They had become the architects of his undoing. And the war Amanda started? It had only just begun. What Amanda had uncovered was more than betrayal, it was revelation of a horrifying deception that threatened not only her sanity but the very lives of everyone who had unknowingly walked into a trap. Kane, the man she once loved and later vowed to destroy, had never truly been who he claimed to be. He was merely a puppet, an impersonator of the elusive and sinister Aristotle Dumas. The real mastermind, the architect of everything that had been unfolding in the shadows, had yet to reveal himself. It had all been a performance, a show staged to perfection to lull everyone into a dangerous sense of complacency. And Amanda, with her legal precision and her sharp instinct for deceit, had pieced it all together through a series of coded messages, intercepted financial documents, and whispered threats that only she seemed to understand. She didn't want to believe it at first, but the puzzle came together too neatly, too fatally. Kane was a decoy, and the real Dumas was still out there, watching, waiting, preparing. Devon had never seen Amanda like this before, unshaken, consumed, terrifying in her clarity. She spoke not with hysteria, but with a cold, matter-of-fact delivery that chilled him to the bone. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from certainty. And the things she described. The evidence she claimed to hold, the transactions masked under ghost accounts, the silent partners involved, the coded symbols tracing back to a larger network, it all made a horrible kind of sense. Devon didn't want to believe it, but as Amanda laid it out for him in agonizing detail, his heart sank. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. This was something far darker. And they were all standing in the middle of it without realizing the walls were closing in. The trip to Paris had been framed as a celebration, a luxurious gala under the guise of reconciliation, partnership, and high-fashion diplomacy. Invitations had been sent, press releases drafted, and everyone who mattered in Genoa City's corporate elite had been summoned to the City of Lights. Kane had taken center stage, smiling confidently, wearing his new power like a well-tailored suit. Amanda had watched it all unfold with a quiet horror in her chest, knowing full well that this grand spectacle was merely a cover for something much more malevolent. The real Dumas wanted them there, wanted them comfortable, unguarded, predictable. Because the only thing more satisfying than power was watching others bleed for it. Amanda had tried to warn Devon, but there was only so much he could absorb before denial took over. Still, the seed of fear had been planted. He agreed to keep quiet, to observe, to play along. But deep inside, Devon knew they were already in too deep. The hotel they checked into was opulent and historic, overlooking the Seine, every inch designed for beauty and indulgence. But Amanda saw the traps behind the elegance. Security systems were too conveniently positioned. Staff members avoided eye contact. Certain floors were restricted for renovations, yet she swore she saw shadows moving behind frosted glass doors. And then there were the guests who weren't really guests at all, faces she recognized from underground legal documents, aliases tied to global shell companies and money laundering operations. The walls of the hotel held more than luxury. They hid secrets. And Amanda knew they were all being watched. The night of the gala arrived with eerie perfection. Velvet drapes, golden chandeliers, music that tried to drown out the growing dread Amanda felt. She wore a deep crimson gown, an unspoken symbol of both power and warning, and kept her composure as she moved through the crowd. Devon stayed close, his eyes scanning for threats, for the man she claimed still lurked in the background. Kane, oblivious to the storm approaching, played the role of a magnanimous host flawlessly. He toasted to alliances, smiled for photographs, and posed as the formidable Dumas. But Amanda saw the cracks in his performance. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't realize he was merely a pawn. A sacrifice to whatever larger game had been scripted by the real monster behind the curtain. Then the lights dimmed. At first, everyone assumed it was part of the evening's theatrics. But then the music stopped. The emergency lights flickered once, then failed entirely. And that was when the first scream echoed through the ballroom. Panic spread like fire as shadows moved with purpose. Men in formal wear collapsed to the floor, convulsing, blood seeping from their mouths. Gas? Poison? Amanda didn't know. All she knew was that it had begun. This wasn't a warning, it was a slaughter. Devon grabbed her hand, pulling her through the chaos, dodging shattered glass and overturned tables. People were stampeding, clawing at doors that no longer opened. Screams turned to gurgles. Bodies dropped one after another. It was a meticulously timed massacre. Amanda and Devon barely made it into the stairwell when an explosion shook the floor beneath them. The chandelier that had moments ago sparkled over high society now lay twisted in ruin, crushed atop those too slow to flee. Amanda knew this was the message, the unveiling. Dumas had allowed them to believe Kane was the threat so they'd look no further. And now, in a grotesque ballet of death and destruction, the real Dumas had made his presence known without ever showing his face. He didn't need to. Fear was his currency. Death was his signature. And Paris was his theater. They managed to escape the hotel through an underground service tunnel Amanda had memorized from old blueprints. As they emerged onto a quiet side street, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. The fire reflected in Amanda's eyes as she looked back. This was no longer just about betrayal or revenge. This was war. Kane, wherever he was, would likely become the first suspect. And maybe that was the plan all along. Dumas would vanish again, and Kane, his puppet, would take the fall, forever branded a mass murderer. Unless Amanda spoke. Unless she could prove what she knew. But doing so meant exposing herself, risking her own life, and dragging Devon further into a world neither of them understood. Devon, still trembling from what he had seen, asked Amanda the one question that lingered above all. Who was Dumas? Who was the real man behind the chaos? Amanda looked ahead into the dark Parisian alleyway and whispered, more to herself than to him, that she didn't know. But she would find out. And when she did, she wouldn't just expose him, she would destroy him. Because some truths, once unearthed, demand blood. And this time, Amanda wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a witness. A survivor. And soon, she would be Dumas's reckoning.